LiveNOW look there at the White House here. Major news on the Israel-Hamas war front coming from President Biden today. We did hear from this as well from the president himself. I want to put up the tweet confirming the report from Laura Seligman there at Politico saying this. The U.S. military is working to airdrop humanitarian aid to Gaza in the coming days. LiveNOW look there. Also in southern Israel, looking into the Gaza Strip. We also have a pretty cool nighttime view there. This is live in Tel Aviv as well. Let's talk about this major development in the Israel-Hamas war and what it means for the United States' role in it. We're going to do that right now with our friend, national security analyst and expert and retired Marine intelligence officer, Hal Kempfer, also co-host of the Strat podcast, and he joins me on this Friday. Hal, thanks for being with us here. We were kind of texting offline about what this could potentially mean that the United States will begin airdropping humanitarian assistance into Gaza a day after dozens of Palestinians were killed during a chaotic encounter with Israeli troops. I'm reading from the Associated Press. First, I just have to note the verbiage here now that the Associated Press, after this, another day, saying that this attack on a humanitarian aid convoy, they are now calling this a chaotic encounter. What do you make of that?
Andrew, based on the imagery that we got from the drone that the Israelis were flying, it was a chaotic encounter. It was basically the crowds, which are desperate, they're starving. They simply surged on the aid convoy, surged on the trucks. They were grabbing stuff off. And keep in mind, it's still dark. It's very early morning, between 4 and 5. So it's absolute chaos out there, and on all issues of, the group that was approaching the Israeli tanks aside, what you see is just a failed distribution program, a failed delivery program, and what it means is it's very difficult to get aid in there. So we're going to do what the Jordanians and others have been doing, which is doing airdrops, if you will, of aid from via parachute into the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, and Hal, not only airdrops too, but the prospect of marine drops as well by sea. What would that look like?
Well, it's interesting. As you know, I'm a former paratrooper, parachutist, and so I'm very familiar with that. And of course, a Marine, well, that's kind of what we do, is from the sea onto shore. What it would be is they would fly planes over, probably C-130s, but it could be any type of plane that they want, and they would fly, and they basically push large pallets of MREs, is what I'm told, meals ready to eat, that would then parachute into the area. Now, the problem with this area is the density. You have this very dense, confined population. You have destroyed infrastructure. You have terrain where, basically some of the open terrain was former battlefields. There could be improvised explosive devices, mines, all sorts of stuff out there. So the challenge becomes, where are the drop zones? Where do you want to drop the aid where it will be effective? One of the problems with airborne operations like this, it makes for a wonderful visual of pushing pallets out of the back of aircraft, and you see it gently floating down to earth. It's not the most efficient distribution process, because when it gets down to earth, in this situation, you're going to have the local populace go out there and basically strip down the pallet and take everything they can. So it's not an orderly distribution of aid. The other side is that they can do a marine, basically a maritime insert, if you will. In this case, they'll probably use some sort of landing craft. There's various types available. Could be the type where you've seen from World War II, where basically they go up on the beach, and then basically the bow of the craft drops down with a ramp, and they would offload it very quickly and probably get out of there very quickly, and they might do it in the early hours of the morning as well.
Okay.
Again, distribution issues. Who distributes what's going on there? So there's a couple different ways, and frankly, it's interesting. The moment I saw the airborne insert, I said, I wonder why they don't do the LCU, and of course it popped up right afterwards. It said they're looking at doing the maritime insert as well. I was like, well, that makes sense.
So Hal, let's look under the hood, shall we? We're almost 5 months into this war. Why now? And Biden said this today in the Oval Office. He said, aid flowing to Gaza is nowhere nearly enough now. It's nowhere nearly enough. Innocent lives are on the line. and children's lives are on the line. Now, is this a direct answer, a direct response, I should say, to the Biden administration's, somewhat grumbling about getting the Israeli government, Netanyahu, to get this humanitarian aid into Gaza? Is this a direct response to that, saying we're at the end of our rope here, we're going to take matters into our own hands? Because there are reports, Hal, that some of this aid is available, but it's not getting to where it needs to be. And so maybe this is purely speculation here. Do you agree?
I think there is some truth that we're trying to do this more directly. We've been working with the Israelis, letting them, as we saw with that aid convoy where, they basically got swarmed. That was a completely Israeli operation. They were using contractors to bring the aid in, and it just went very, very badly. So we're looking at other ways to do it more directly. The thing with airborne and maritime, it's an ability to literally put the aid in ourselves directly, make sure it gets in there, and then maritime is a little bit more tenuous just because at some point you have to touch shore, which means you have a chance of coming in contact with the local populace, but also coming in contact potentially with Hamas.
Yeah, right.
So that's not good, but it is a way to get it in there. So both of these are a more direct way, but basically we've been telling the Israelis all along, you've got to do more on the humanitarian aid part. You've got to do more on the humanitarian aid part. And the problem within the Gaza Strip keeps getting more and more desperate. They need food, they need medical supplies, but most of all, they need food, and they also need clean water. They need shelter, and it's just not happening, and not happening fast enough to prevent what could truly be, and certainly what the United Nations and others are saying, is truly going to become a tremendously horrific humanitarian situation if it continues.
Okay, so
things have gone this far. Let's put it that way.
All right, Hal. So my last question on this, and then we're going to go to commercial break really quickly. For those watching who look at the war in Ukraine, they look at the war between Israel and Hamas, and they question and wonder what extent will the American involvement be in these two conflicts. Of course, there's no U.S. troops in Ukraine. There's no U.S. troops in Israel, fighting alongside them. But when they hear this announcement today, are their concerns validated that the American involvement in this war has just grown exponentially after this announcement today? Are those concerns valid or unfounded?
Well, there's always a concern that there's boots on the ground. And technically, once somebody pulls a pallet or whatever, or drives a vehicle with pallets off of a landing craft and puts it on the shore, technically, at some point, our boots will literally be on the ground. With the airdrops, you won't see boots on the ground, but we are flying manned aircraft directly over the battlefield, if you will, and dropping us stuff. So it's an obvious concern. I don't see really anything more here than what we do in other countries around the world. You got to remember, we have a U.S. military presence in not dozens of countries, but it varies at times. But at times, it's been over 100 countries around the world, and you don't hear anything about it. We have military in West Africa, East Africa, Southern Africa, Asia, all over Asia, everywhere, and doing humanitarian disaster relief operations. In this case, humanitarian operations all the time. And I don't see this as any particularly more dangerous than anything else we're doing anywhere else.
Okay.
Also with Ukraine, I should mention, we are not going to put boots on the ground. That's very clear. But we do have a non-military presence there that's doing a lot of logistics stuff and things like that.
Right, and I have to add as well, just to remind viewers, speaking about the American presence and involvement in the Israel-Hamas war, early on, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, we were sending surveillance drones over Gaza in the search, in the hunt for some of these hostages. 100 plus still remain there in Hamas captivity. Hal, stay with us. We're moving to Europe and Asia when we come back.